Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron, and we're back here today with another edition of Budget Magic, and I think we have a pretty sweet one this week. We are playing a deck I'm calling rAllies in Standard, and this deck is really cool. It's only 54 bucks in the paper world, 26 tickets online, and it fights the metagame on a bunch of different levels. First off, it's a tribal deck. While there are a few non-allies in the deck, it's mostly built around allies. So it has a lot of tribal synergies with allies that grant an ability whenever an ally enters the battlefield to all the creatures we have. So that's pretty sweet. It is also an aggro deck. Sometimes we can just go 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, 4 drop, and curve our opponent out and win that way. And then it's also a combo deck because it has Rally the Ancestors and some typical rally cards, so we can also win out of nowhere with this one big turn with Rally the Ancestors. So I'm really excited about this deck. It has performed really well. I've lost some matches with it, but even the matches we lost with this deck, it feels really competitive, and things kind of went wrong for us to lose, but it's very competitive, and I would certainly play it at a FNM or maybe even something better than that with some tuning. So anyway, let's talk about the deck. So part 1 of the deck is the allies. This is our creature base is mostly allies, and this also provides the aggro element of our deck. So we have 4 Expedition Envoy, pretty simple one. It's basically a Savannah Lions, except it is a human ally scout. So 1 white mana, you get a 2/1. When you can play these on turn 1, it puts a lot of pressure on an opponent and gets in some early damage, which is really important to make the rest of our aggro plan successful. Then we have 4 Zulaport Cutthroats. You probably know this from the Rally decks. It's basically a Blood Artist. It's 1 and a black for a 1/1. It is also an ally, of course, and whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature that we control dies, we get to drain for 1. Each opponent loses a life, and we gain 1 life. So this allows us to kind of combo off by sacrificing our creatures to deal more damage, and it works well. It's not a good beatdown card on its own, but if we can get in some early damage with our Expedition Envoy, for example, then we don't need that many Zulaport Cutthroat triggers to actually finish off the game. Then we have 4 Calistria Healers. This is kind of a reverse Zulaport Cutthroat. It's 1 and a black for a 1/2, and it has Rally, which is the ally ability. So whenever Calistria Healer or another ally enters the battlefield under our control, we get to drain for 1. Each opponent loses a life, we gain a life. So between Zulaport Cutthroat and Calistria Healer, we can deal quite a bit of damage to our opponent and get their life total pretty low without attacking, so we don't have to combine too many attacks with those triggers for us to win the game. Then we have Core Blade Whirl. It's 1 white and 1 colorless for a 2/2. It has Rally, so whenever Core Blade Whirl or another ally enters the battlefield, all of our creatures gain first strike. So this is mostly good because it helps our Expedition Envoy push through damage, and sometimes it helps the Core Blade Whirl push through damage. When we play Expedition Envoy on turn 1, Core Blade Whirl on turn 2, we can attack with the Expedition Envoy. Then the next turn, we can play another ally and attack with both the Expedition Envoy and the Core Blade Whirl, and they're really difficult to block due to the first strike. Next, we have the Mythic ally, Drana, Liberator of Malakir. It's a legendary creature, vampire ally. It has flying and first strike, and whenever Drana deals combat damage to a player, we put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature that we control. So the sweet part about Drana is that it crusades our entire team, and since she has first strike, this takes place before the rest of our creatures deal damage, so we can attack with Drana, she hits our opponent, we get counters on everything, and then our Expedition Envoy and our Core Blade Whirl hit for 3 damage instead of 2 damage because those counters go on before regular combat damage takes place. Finally, we have Chasm Guide. This one is actually a really key card to the deck. So it's 3 in a red, and you get a 3/2 with Rally, and the Rally ability on Chasm Guide is all of our creatures gain haste whenever it or another ally enters the battlefield. One way this works really well is with the surprise attack from Drana. If we have a Chasm Guide on the battlefield before we get Drana on the battlefield, we can play a Drana, it gives everything haste, we attack with Drana, crusade our entire team, and deal a bunch of damage out of nowhere. One of the problems with Drana is she just gets stonewalled by like Mantis Rider in specific, that's why she doesn't see much play right now. but she is a really, really powerful card and has a really powerful ability. And when we can sneak attack her in and our opponent isn't expecting it, it can do some really crazy things. So this is our tribal package, and also our aggro package is built around these ally creatures. But then we also have some creatures that work with our combo package, and these are typical rally cards that you would see in other rally decks. So 2 Grim Haruspecs. It's a 3/2 for 2 and a black. It has morph, so we can play it face down and turn it up for 1 black mana. And it says whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you draw a card. So by itself, it's not that great, but it works really well with our next 2 cards, our 4 copies of Nantucko Husk and our 4 copies of Butcher of the Horde. These are free sacrifice outlets. So with the Grim Haruspecs on the battlefield, we can sack our Expedition Envoys, we can sack our Core Blade Whirls, our Calistria Healers, those random allies. Sometimes we get the Blood Artist triggers along the way, the Zulaport Cutthroat triggers, if we have a Zulaport Cutthroat on the battlefield, and draw a whole bunch of cards with the Haruspecs while filling our graveyard and giving a bonus to Nantucko Husk and Butcher of the Horde. And then, why it doesn't really fit with the rest of the theme, we do have 1 Murderous Cut. We have a bunch more removal in the sideboard, but this is our 1 main deck out if we run into an Anaffenza the Foremost or something, which really can lock down our deck pretty hard. And then finally, of course, the combo piece itself, Rally the Ancestors. It is 2 white and an X for an instant, and it says return each creature card with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Exile those creatures at the beginning of your upkeep, and exile Rally the Ancestors. So we can play this aggro plan in the early game, get in some damage, eventually we'll draw a sack outlet, and we can sack away our board, then use Rally to get everything back and get a whole bunch more triggers from our Calistria Healer, from our Zulaport Cutthroat, and give everything haste with Chasm Guide and win the game on the spot with 1 big rally. So it depends on the matchup. Some matchups we want to be the aggro deck, and we want to win by beating down. Other matchups we're primarily a rally deck, where we're chump blocking a lot, getting things in our graveyard, and trying to win with a big Rally the Ancestors. And that depends not only on the matchup, but also our hand and what we have going on in any given game. But we have these multiple levels of attack built into the deck. So one question I wanted to answer briefly, which I was sure would come up, is why play this ally rally deck, rAllies, over other rally decks? And for me, it comes down to 2 different creatures. We already talked about them, but this is the competitive advantage of the ally rally deck, rAllies, over the other rally decks. So Calistria Healer can win the game on its own. If you can get 2 or 3 copies of Calistria Healer into the graveyard, when you rally it and a bunch of other allies back, you get a ton of damage. It's not uncommon for us to kill our opponent on the spot just by Calistria Healer when we rally everything back. So that's one big advantage, is it basically functions as Zulaport Cutthroat 5 through 8, more or less. Like, it works differently, but it has the same effect with Rally. Every creature we get back just about is dealing a damage, which is what the Zulaport Cutthroat does after we sack creatures, but this triggers when creatures enter the battlefield. The other really big one is the Chasm Guide. This lets our rallies win us the game even when we don't have enough Zulaport Cutthroats or Calistria Healers to drain our opponent, because this gives all of our creatures haste. We can rally, and we can break that symmetry. Like, that's the problem with Rally, is it returns the creatures, but they exile themselves on our upkeep, so we never get a chance to attack with them. With Chasm Guide, we can, during our first main phase, rally, everything gets haste, and swing with our entire team. And that's a way to make sure we can push through that extra damage. It lets us rally at times when we don't have a sacrifice outlet. We can still rally because we get to attack with everything and win the game that way. So for me, it's these 2 cards that are the big reason to play an ally version of Rally the Ancestors over the other builds out there. The sideboard, we have more removal and some cards to deal with our opponent's threats. So we have 4 Duresses, mostly to take care of counter spells, but also Planeswalkers and other troubling non-creature permanents. Self-Inflicted Wound, 3 copies, that deals with Mantis Rider. It also deals with a Siege Rhino. It hits a ton of creatures in our current format. 3 copies of Crackling Doom, really, really good against dragons and other big creatures. Basically an Edict that does a little bit of damage, which is nice, and also kills the biggest creature our opponent has. a single Lantern Scout, we can bring this in aggro matchups where we want even more life gain. The nice thing about our deck is it does function extremely well against aggro, like a Tarka Red and Green-Red Landfall, because we can just play these creatures that incidentally gain us life, use them to chump block, and then rally them all back and do it again. So it's really hard, unless they can combo kill us with Become Immense and Temur Battle Rage, it's really hard for them to actually beat us. One Ruinous Path, this is there specifically to deal with Planeswalkers. A single copy of Murderous Cut, more removal if we run into Anafensa decks, and then 2 copies of Tragic Arrogance. I just wanted to try this card out. It is good against some weird fringe matchups. Anyway, that's the deck. I think that this deck is really competitive for the price. I think it can keep up with just about any deck in the format. And as I mentioned before, I think there are some benefits to playing this build of Rally the Ancestors, the rAllies build, over some of the more typical builds that you'll see out there, like the 4-color rally decks and so on. So anyway, I had a ton of fun playing it this week. I had a lot of success with it this week. Unfortunately, I had some really sweet matches recorded, and then I had a computer crash and lost them, so I had to re-record everything. But I think that the new matches turned out really well as well, so I'm excited for that. Anyway, definitely check it out. I think you'll have fun playing it. The most expensive card in the deck is the Drana, by far. That takes up almost half the deck's value. But I think Drana is a really good card to own right now, because, like I said, her main problem is Mantis Rider, and Mantis Rider is going to be rotating. So there's a legitimate chance that, depending on how the format shakes out, Drana could be a 4-of in one of the best decks in Standard at some point in the next year, and that would drive her price up quite a bit. Like, she is costed in such a way where she can't see playing competitive tournaments, and she is extremely powerful. So I'm really excited for her once Mantis Rider rotates. So if you have the money up front, it's really not a bad place to park some of your money. You can play the build without Drana, but like I said, it's not a bad card to own anyway, because I think she's going to be really good at some point. She at least has a chance to be really good at some point over the next year of Standard. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Make sure to check out mtggoldfish.com for the article of this budget magic, tons of other great articles, decks prices, the metagame strategy, pretty much everything and anything you could want related to Magic the Gathering. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to click that subscribe button that's about to pop up on the bottom of your screen. It keeps you up to date on all the latest and greatest in video content from mtggoldfish.com, and it does us a huge favor if you would take a second to subscribe. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the videos. Thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you soon.